welcome to Chiro Thoughts. This is part 3 of our GI series, and we are going to be doing a Q&A, questions that you have asked us on social media, things that are prevalent and trending in social media as well. So we're gonna kick it right off. First question, what can we be eating to help restore our gut microbiome? Supplements, foods, all things, anything come to mind off the top of your head?
Yeah, a lot of things.
Okay.
Number one, I think even before going to what can restore it is, are we continuing to eat things that are damaging our gut microbiome? So I would say hands down, number one is antibiotics, right? Antibiotics destroy bacteria, right? Biotic means biology, which is a study of life. So an antibiotic is anti-life, okay?
So true.
And a probiotic is pro-life. And so obviously there can be harmful bacteria. There's a time and a place for an antibiotic.
But antibiotics kill good and bad.
Antibiotics kill good and bad. And so that is the problem, is that our goal is to feel better, to get over a sickness or an ear infection or strep throat or something of that nature. We take the antibiotic and we don't realize that it's destroying our gut microbiome. So some research I read years ago said that if you take an antibiotic before the age of 2 years old, you disrupt the GI tract for the rest of your life. And that if you take it after 2 years old, it can take somewhere between 2 and 3 years to fully repair. So taking antibiotics, this is why, hands down, one of the biggest things we talk about is avoid the antibiotics at all costs, right? The medical community, the allopathic model will say, hey, you have an ear infection, try this antibiotic. And right, the research says that that's not the best option, but we don't ever look at the negative side effect of the antibiotic. We only say, well, it can kill an infection, but we never really address all the problems that it associates itself with. So we want our patients to stop before you take the antibiotic, of course, if it's not necessary, and reevaluate what else can we do other than the antibiotic to regain our health.
For sure.
The other issue with the antibiotic is that 80% of antibiotics in the United States go to our livestock, right? They go to our chicken, they go to our cattle, they don't go directly to us through the medication. We're getting secondhand antibiotics, right? Through poultry and meat, right? So even if you don't take antibiotics, the chances are you're not eating 100% clean meat all the time, so you are getting them into the body and into the system. You guys all know, right, the organic movement, and then even the hormone-free milk. You'll see it. Hey, it's we've tested this without the use of the human growth hormone and some of the antibiotics that they use. And so those are reasons that we push more clean diets in that way. So avoiding antibiotics, I think, is number one. You can take all the probiotics you want, which is my first supplement that I would recommend. But if you're taking the antibiotics, it's not going to have nearly the effect. So that would be my first. And then number two, I would say absolutely is a good probiotic, right? Because we can't avoid all the antibiotics, because most likely most of us have taken antibiotics in our life, and the food that we eat is mostly devoid healthy bacteria, because we don't eat fermented foods like we have in the past. We
That's something
don't.
I was going to mention is sauerkraut.
Yes.
It's a really good one to help restore
Fermented
that.
foods.
Yeah.
So the goal is
any fermented foods.
exactly, the goal is to get probiotics, healthy bacteria in the gut. Our probiotics outnumber our cells 10 to 1. So we have 30 trillion cells in the human body. We have 300 trillion bacteria. And so if we're not replacing
we're made up
them,
of microbes.
we're made up of microbes. And so a good probiotic taken daily. And then if
any specific brands you want to mention?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really. I mean,
just a good
there are different brands
whole.
that we have used. Unfortunately, the one that we use now, we can't even get anymore. So that's been an issue. But getting probiotics, and like we always say as well, is supplementation is important, but it's probably not as important as getting it in our food. And so I don't know if you want to go over maybe some of the main sources like you were talking about. What are foods?
Raw dairy is a great one. That one just has all of the vitamins and nutrients that you need. specifically in raw milk. That's actually our next question. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. So yeah, is raw dairy good for the gut? It's very, very good for the gut. Raw dairy isn't devoid of all of the vitamins that you would get in there, you know, A, D, E, and K, the micronutrients, the enzymes that you need to be able to break down the milk, lactase, you know, being used to break down that lactose in the milk. So great to restore that gut microbiome. Yeah, raw cheeses, raw, you know, yogurts and stuff like that. And then fermented foods.
Yeah, fermented foods. I mean, I think you said sauerkraut. I think of like kimchi is one. Trying to think of other fermented foods. That used to be, I mean, fermented vegetables. People ferment lots of different fermented vegetables, but they're definitely something that we don't get. I mean, cabbage, fermented, but we don't see a lot of that in our diet anymore, unfortunately. So trying to find probiotics not only in a supplement form, but also from food.
From foods is really good. Alrighty, well we can segue right into our next question, which is raw dairy good for the gut, and why is pasteurized milk not good? So I have a couple studies on here that I was looking at. One done by the NIH, was done in May of 2020, looked at the intake of unpasteurized milk compared to pasteurized milk. And unpasteurized milk increased the bacterial genus Lactobacillus in the human gut, which is a really good way to increase the functional richness of the microbiome profile. So example A right there. 2019, there's a study from China that was looking at all the different forms of processing of milk. So boiling, microwave, heating, even dry, like formula, which is kind of interesting. I don't think about it that way. But all of these expose the milk to a super high boiling point of 284 degrees Fahrenheit, which denatures that protein and causes aggregation and then oxidative damage in the plasma, liver, brain tissues. Ultra high temperatures also causes formation of protein oxidation products, which caused learning and memory impairment in rats, which is not great. So one of the questions on there was saying, you know, if we're giving this to rats and it's impairing their learning and memory, why are we giving pasteurized milk to our kids? You know, you can expect that it's going to do the same thing. So some more good things that unpasteurized milk has is saturated fatty acids, can lower the risk of obesity, chronic inflammation, CVD, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes. So all of these things helping to decrease that chronic disease just by increasing that diversified gut microbiome. So we could go on and on about the studies of good things about raw milk.
If you look at any food, most people, if you ask the question, is it better to eat raw or to eat something cooked, right? People say, well, no, raw, because raw has a better nutritional profile, right? There's a lot of cofactors. So another one is like the microwave oven, right? People inherently know that microwaving something is not great. So when you cook something, when you heat something, almost immediately you kill enzymes, right? You definitely decrease the nutritional value, right? As soon as certain vitamins and minerals are exposed to heat, things like vitamin C, you start to lose that nutrition right away. But then there's other cofactors. So not only enzymes and minerals, but like you said, you break down the proteins and you also break down the fatty acids. So although some things can tolerate heat more than others, dairy is not one that does very good. You mentioned lactase. So most people that have an issue and they say, oh, I'm lactose intolerant, it's always in pasteurized milk because you've taken the lactase out. So those people who are lactose intolerant that have raw dairy typically don't have an issue because there's plenty of lactase within the milk. And so this is kind of a broader conversation about food in general. That's when you heat it to high temperatures, you break the food down. And the other issue that I see on the side of this is, well, then what's the need for pasteurization? Why do we start pasteurizing? And the answer I always give is because sick animals produce sick byproducts. So if you have a contained animal feeding operation of cows that are all living in one building, right? We talked about this a little bit with the mad cow disease and feeding cows to other cows. When you have an animal whose immune system is weakened, they're taking daily antibiotics in their feed. They're not eating grass like they're designed to eat. They're eating grains, they're eating sugar to get them bigger, fatter. They produce very unhealthy byproducts.
Yeah, well, and those secondary antibiotics in the milk, so then essentially you have to boil off those toxins. So they heat them up to super high temperatures to kill off, those toxins, and then also any other disease or anything in the milk that could create issues, which is interesting because this other study showed that there was 442,000 illnesses that were traced back to pasteurized milk, and there was 1,100 that were traced back to raw milk, and no one has ever died from raw milk. However, there's been 50 Americans that have died from pasteurized milk and cheese. So I think there's just a disconnect with what they're pushing and what's normal. And I mentioned at the health talk that we did that there's only 13 states that legally sell raw milk in stores, and Michigan is not one of them, unfortunately. So you need to find your nearest raw milk plug.
So the biggest issue, like we see in most things, is we've created this issue, right? We've created the issue of needing pasteurization because of the profit of trying to get an animal bigger, fatter, faster, feeding it food that it shouldn't be eating, giving it antibiotics that it probably ought not to be having because it's getting sick from the food that it's eating. And then all of a sudden we have this unhealthy byproduct, and now we have to heat it to destroy what we've done in the first place. And so it's really, we say getting to know your farmer. It is really, you want to have a reputable source of raw milk. I don't know that I would necessarily buy it off the street, but find somebody, that that's taking how they raise their animals, the grass-fed movement.
You want to make sure it's a clean farm, that it, it's not, there's not pathogens traced back to the milk in the samples that are tested, and you want to make sure it's a good.
And much like all other things that are all natural, when you look at the basic form, it's much better for you than the pasteurization. And we kind of look across the board and say, we mentioned this before, a return to the way we used to do things, not because it's this new hippie movement, but because that's the way God created it.
What
and
was the quote? The ancients have all the answers, or the ancients have.
Mark Twain said, "The ancients steal all of our best ideas."
There you go.
Yeah, that's right. Where were we having infections from raw milk 1,000 years ago? Was there a need for pasteurization? I think the answer is no, because the cows were doing exactly what they were designed to do.
Grass-fed and finished. They were grazing on the land.
There were no other options. Right?
Yep, exactly. Alrighty, going to our next question. Any specific things that irritate the gut lining? Obviously, there could be a plethora of different things. There's a lot of people that are sensitive to a lot of different things, or have some sort of autoimmune condition that can contribute to, things being sensitive. So things that come to my mind are seed oils, lectins, saponins, sugar, processed sugar can create a ton of inflammation. I was listening to a podcast and it said that from the point of chronic disease, the initial point usually always starts off with inflammation of some sort. So then, the body reacts to that and you get some sort of chronic disease. But specific things that can damage the protective mucus layer, killing healthy bacteria. There's a lot of different things that we specifically, I would say, what are your top 3 things that you would avoid to irritate the gut?
So I thought it was interesting when you said, I can't remember the first thing you said, but you said lectins was number 2. The reason when people eat beans, lectins are high in beans, the reason that beans make you gassy is because the lectin is undigestible and it irritates the gut lining. Right, so for sure, and that's why actually. And
a lot of nightshades too, lectins in like tomato skins and tomato seeds too can be irritating.
And the recommendation on the beans is to put them in a jar of water, right, to saturate them, because it actually decreases or increases the digestibility of the lectin. So my top 3, I would say hands down, in my experience, the number one thing that I think causes irritation are pesticides. Pesticides, glyphosate, right? Their own research says we're using a pesticide to kill the bug. Okay, how does it do it? It's a neurotoxin, so it gets into the nervous system, but it actually goes into the GI system of the bug and implodes the bug from the inside out. It actually creates swelling, enough inflammation that the bug actually explodes, which is crazy, right, when you think about that. And then we have a whole country of people whose stomachs are really hurting, and they eat these things and they feel like their stomach wants to explode, and that's exactly what the toxin was designed to do in the first place, was to create this bug that died. And so again, we've created an issue. I always go right back and say, if we rested the land like God intended, then we wouldn't have to fortify the land with fertilizer. And if we didn't fertilize, then we wouldn't have the bug issue. And if we didn't have the bug issue, we wouldn't have to use the pesticide. And so it's this vicious cycle, and all these sustainable farmers will tell you it's about taking care of the land. That's the most important thing. When we don't take care of the land, we deplete the minerals in the soil of its nitrogen. Now we have to fortify, and just like we have to fortify our own food because it's not there. And so this pesticide issue is massive, right? We've seen the clean 15, the dirty dozen list.
I was going to mention that,
which is huge, right? But getting rid of pesticides, and what I have found is that people don't have the ability to reject a pesticide because it's a foreign substance. So their bodies start rejecting whatever food that they consume the pesticide with. Most of the time, that's wheat and that's gluten. And so people become very gluten insensitive because gluten, there's way more pesticide on wheat than any other crop. And so we're getting conventional wheat, and again, back to our processed foods and our packaged foods, high dose of pesticide, creating all kinds of GI dysfunction, and it's absolutely number one. And why people that go gluten-free do so well with it.
Because they're not consuming those
They're not consuming the pesticide. So. Cool. All right. That was number one.
Number one. What's number 2?
Our lives are riddled with toxins. And so we have environmental toxins, but we put a lot of toxins in, right? We talk about our cleaning supplies, we talk laundry soaps, hand soaps. So the one that was used for a long time in hand soaps and mouthwashes was triclosan. Not only was it a known cancer causer, but it was also a known endocrine disruptor and GI disruptor. And again, if it's an antibacterial, it's killing the bacteria, it's going to disrupt the GI system. So I think really looking at the different toxins that are in our lives, right, and the more we can eliminate those, the healthier of the intestinal tract we have. So antibiotics, pesticides, toxins, endocrine disruptors are probably the big ones. Anything to add to that? Anything I'm missing?
I'm trying to think. I did mention saponin, so that's like a sudsy chemical that irritates your gut lining and actually creates permeability. So all of the toxins that you're supposed to excrete out get leached into your bloodstream, which can create a lot of issues. What was the other one that I mentioned?
Seed oils.
Seed oils. We have to look for that. Definitely irritating to the gut. Just the way, if you've seen any of those YouTube videos on how they process seed oils, it's absolutely disgusting. So seed oils, and then processed sugar creates a ton of inflammation in the gut as well. So if you have a lot of bad bacteria, you're feeding the bad bacteria essentially with sugar because they eat that. So.
So if you think about that, right, take a step back and say, okay, we're using lots of antibiotics in our children, and even as adults, every time we get sick. Our diets are loaded with pesticides most of the time. We have the environmental chemicals, the household cleaning agents. right? The foods that we are eating have sugar in them like crazy, and the seed oils and the processed food. And it's like
just totally depleting your gut of everything it needs.
and it's not a shock that, man, massive amounts of people have GI dysfunction because we're directly consuming these things into the GI system. Our body does have natural detoxifying processes, but you just can't keep up. So we have to make sure that we are doing the things that we can do to eliminate, to minimize, to detox, and then to replace with healthier alternatives.
Yeah, you definitely need to be an active participant in your gut health, because like we say, if you're on a hill and you're letting gravity do its work, you're honestly on a downslope, and your health is gonna get worse unless you're actively trying to make it better.
The only way to coast is to coast downhill.
Exactly. So last question here, how do I know what my gut looks like on the inside? How do I know if I do have SIBO, so small intestinal bacterial overgrowth in my gut? How do I know, if I do have constipation or gut irritation, or, sometimes something just isn't sitting right with me? How do we get that tested? And my answer would be get a stool test. That's probably the best way to gain insight just objectively into what your gut's doing. So you can see, everything, if you do have a bacterial overgrowth, or if you do have something like that. I would say stool test.
I mean, I think testing, number one, I would say most of the time people understand that they have an intestinal issue, right? And so it's not, low motility, inflammation, I eat, it hurts, indigestion, spastic colon,
IBS,
all of these things. So
there's a lot of people that have IBS.
And most people aren't running to see what their stool sample looks like unless they have a bunch of symptoms. So we know that we're most likely on the wrong path. We're having irritability, indigestion, and I think starting, not that stool sample's bad, but starting with these things that we've set up and say, hey, let's start eliminating.
Or some sort of elimination diet.
So start with the elimination diet, and really, I don't know if that matters how much what our intestines look like, but focusing on the things that we can actually change. A stool sample is probably the number one test to actually measure what's there. But if you have the symptom, you already know it doesn't look good.
For sure. I think it would be insightful to just know. I think I'm one of those people that I want to know exactly what's going on, so I know how to tackle it. But also giving yourself some grace and knowing that it's going to take a while to restore your gut health, because it takes a little while to degenerate it, and replacing and replenishing all those good microbiomes takes a while, because you have to
and man, we've seen it, right? I've seen it with patients who have lots of issues through chiropractic, elimination of the bad foods, and then replacing with a lot of great foods. Actually, one of my pregnant ladies that moved down to Kentucky, she reminded me, she said, man, my intestines have been an absolute mess. And so we got her removing wheat pretty much, and high dose probiotics and digestive enzymes, and totally normalized gut function, which is good. So
cool.
I don't know, what are we talking about this on here? We're just talking. I thought we were just talking.
Cool. All right.
It's very possible, right? It's very, very possible. And it's to me, I've seen a lot of people try to use medication, number one, which doesn't really solve the underlying health issue of cleaning up the gut and restoring the gut microbiome. But then also turn to supplementation, which is, I think they're useful, to detox. And then they're useful for the probiotics, to get high doses of probiotics, because fermented foods aren't as common as they should be. But supplements really don't, they don't look at the scope. So if all we're doing is going to a doc and taking 6 supplements and thinking it's going to solve all of our problems, we're really missing the bigger picture of detoxifying, cleaning up the diet, right?
Getting a properly functioning nervous system.
Right, a properly functioning nervous system, avoiding the environmental toxins like the pesticides, the antibiotics, and really cleaning it up from the inside out.
Yeah, we need to get to that root cause.
Root cause,
All
always.
right. Well, that was our last question. So until next time, that was Chiro Thoughts, GI Q&A.